Hi, this is James Garden, the CineTechGeek, and I'm here with Richard Welsh from Sundog. And as you know, I've been doing a lot of coverage on IMF and how IMF is, bringing a lot of advantages for those who adopt it, even now in its early stages of development. And Richard here from Sundog is actually taking advantage of those tool sets now. He's implemented some stuff for his own company, Sundog, and we've got him here today to actually talk to us about how these tools have been used and how they're actually improving and helping out companies to save money and to do their jobs quicker. So Richard, can you please tell us more about how Sundog has taken advantage of the IMF workflow?
Yeah, sure. So our system is really built around different types of processes, including mastering. We originally built it for digital cinema mastering, which is a very specific playlist-based format, which is very similar to what IMF is. In fact, the foundations are the same. A lot of our customers, especially in the broadcast space, are working right now with ProRes, and they have linear video file processes, which mean that they can't really iterate fast in terms of if they do something and they need to redo it, they've got to remake that whole video stream.
That's right.
So
not just that they have to requalify, recheck that whole video stream.
Exactly, because if you change it, you've changed the entire file, so you've got to watch the whole file again.
That's right. If you render it again, you have to watch it again.
Yeah, exactly. When the background with the digital cinema stuff has really come from building something designed for a lot of versioning. So in that environment, you don't want to have to watch your assets over and over again. And the beauty of the DCP and the IMF package is that once you've watched a set of assets, if you know they're good, you don't really need to watch them again. All you're doing with your system is referencing a playlist. And so if you're confident that your playlist is correct, and there are plenty of ways to check that without having to watch it all through, then it will play correctly. The other advantage there is if you need to change something, so you have maybe a different edit for another territory, or you have different soundtrack or subtitles, these again are really easy to drop into the timeline and get a new package. Again, only have to QC those assets. Once they're done, if you're mixing and matching later, you can be confident that those assets are good. If you've got something where maybe there's a mistake, you need to chop out a section, again, you can make just that section, and you can use the playlist function to call that section over the top of the original asset. So your mistake is actually still there in the original asset, but the new asset is the thing that gets played, so it's fine, because actually, no one's ever going to know that the original one's there.
Yeah, so unlike a tape, for example, the old versions are still there. You've just sort of replaced them with another essence to replace the problem part. Or if you need to make two versions with slightly different edits, all the content for both versions are there, but the metadata just tells you how to use those essences to play each version.
Exactly. Now there's some complexity to that, and this is where it becomes interesting for people adopting this now. For instance, if you make a cut in the playlist, you need to check that your audio is going to be okay, because you're actually literally hard cutting the audio on a sample and then jumping into the other sample. So you can't kind of do that willy-nilly without maybe having problems, a little snap or something. But there are ways around that. One of the ways is just to take that new audio cut and say, okay, well, I've still got my audio system where I'm outputting that. I'm going to just take those few seconds around there. I'm going to start here where I know I'm sample accurate with my incoming sound, outgoing sound, and then finish here, and I'll do the crossfade in an audio editing system, generate 1 or 2 seconds of new audio, and drop that in as a new playlist insert. So you can actually get, if you've got something you have to do in that spot, where you know that the hard cut is going to cause problems with the audio, you could do it the other way, right?
But that's only if you're changing the audio.
No, I mean, if you cut the playlist, you could potentially have a sample mismatch, because you might be going from very quiet to very loud.
But wouldn't you usually, if you had to fix a credit roll, because
you'd choose a spot that's good to do it in, right? Okay. It's the easy way to do it. Choose a spot where you're not going to hear that audio snap.
Okay.
Or you can do a fix, but it's very simple with the playlist though to do that. You can drop in the new little bit of audio, and again, just like picture, maybe let's say you've corrected a few, or in that case you've taken a few seconds of picture out. But in the scenario we were just talking about, where you want to fix something that's wrong, you're telling the playlist to drop that new picture in, You can do the same with the audio.
Yes,
if you need to
right.
fix a small section of audio, just drop that bit
That's
in.
right, but you just need to be more careful of how you drop it in to a degree.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a lot of, you've got clients adopting this today. In terms of what's the real benefit they've seen from using the traditional workflow that most of the people out there are using today, and adopting these new, IMF as an example, DCPs too, as you're saying.
Yeah.
What's the main benefit and the thing that really sees driving them towards your type of workflows?
Well, I think that the way in which this helps is that you're not creating all these different deliverables lots of times. Actually, one of the biggest pains, especially if you're doing a lot of versioning and a lot of iterating the same content with lots of different assets, is you've got quite big teams of people having to build that every time if you're not working in this environment. The beauty of doing something like an IMF is that the playlist is easily transmutable to, say, a DCP, and you could do an interop, a SMPTE, and an IMF all in one output. There's some complexity around bit rates there, but then again, if you have the right automation in the system, it should know that, hey, an interop needs to be 250 megabits, IMF is maybe a 500 megabit stream, so I need to take that down to the right bit rate. But then downstream, when you deliver to your customer, it's like huge benefits for them, because you don't have to describe all that to them when you're delivering the content. It's built into the metadata, so they know what they're receiving is what they want, and they can then use their systems to read that appropriately, archive it appropriately. One of the beauties, for instance, with the playlist system is that if you layer on top something like unique asset identification in your storage, and we work specifically in cloud, and there are ways to uniquely identify the objects in cloud. It's different to a UUID, it's more about how you reference that file itself. But what you can then do is...
URN is that would be called?
Well, no, because that's more about how it's stored. This is more about identifying uniquely that this piece of content is definitely this piece of content.
Right, okay.
So there's actually a format called C4ID, which is a hash, it's a pseudo hash of the file, which says, okay, this file is unique. Yes. And you don't need to send that C4ID, you can run that C4ID on a bit of content in 2 remote locations, and you can be certain that if that C4ID matches, you have the same piece of content. Yes. And that's very useful in that environment, but there's another advantage to that. When you're working with playlists, these assets are all unique. Like, it's not you're not in a sort of individual picture frame based world where maybe 2 black frames look the same, so they're sort of uniquely that black frame, but if you made 10 of them, they're all the same. But we have a problem with playlist management at the moment without that layer, where you may end up with a lot of assets being duplicated in your storage. Now that can cost you a lot of money. As that starts to balloon, you are potentially storing assets 3-4 times, and the beauty of what we have with the playlist and layering on things like the C4ID is that now you can deduplicate that stuff on the way in without even, it's a relatively simple process to know that, okay, I've already got that asset because I can see the C4ID. I don't need to bring that in again.
That's right. Even
though the playlist is telling me I need it, I know I've got it.
In a repository somewhere. It's like it's very much what you're describing to me is in a more simple form, is that we're turning our infrastructure into like a database version of data, right?
Yeah.
Where it doesn't matter. We don't think of a file on a disk anymore. We think of a file in a cloud. Be the cloud be part of your facility, or in the cloud itself. It's all sort of becomes ubiquitous, and you don't really have to care where it is so much anymore.
Exactly, yeah. And you can look at it as if it's a volume with folders and files in folders.
You can look at it that way.
You can look at it that way, but it isn't like that.
It could be more.
Yeah.
It can be that. You can make it that, but you could probably expand it to what your infrastructure is. But now let's move on to another topic, and I think it's one of the bigger topics on all this, which is the next stage in this, is the fact that the Netflixes, the Disneys, all the studios are behind IMF, and each studio may have a delivery requirement that's on IMF, and it may be slightly different. But the nice thing about IMF, be it structured about metadata and restructured data or structured data, is that you can build those deliverables into a sort of like a template sort of scenario. So if you are working with a Sundog, sort of company, and you are going to master or send to all these facilities, it's likely, I imagine, you'll be able to say templates for this facility, this facility, this facility, this facility, and the system would automatically do most of the heavy lifting and all that metadata building for you, automated, no mistakes, get rid of the humans make mistakes, and get everything working very seamlessly and without problems. And is that sort of the story I'm sort of coming to see with some of the tools that you're creating?
Absolutely, and that was really something that drove us when we started. I mean, we've only been going 2 years. It's been very heavy development 2 years. I mean, that's really all we've been doing. You know, we do obviously we're working with customers on real content in the real world, but that's been part of the development. And it is interesting actually that exactly as you say, a lot of this stuff doesn't need to be human driven, shouldn't be people writing that stuff, but it is truthfully still being done that way in a lot of cases. What we definitely have to move towards, and it's not just our software, everybody really should be moving in this direction, is yes, you have templated outputs, so you know what a Netflix deliverable should look like, you know what a BBC deliverable should look like, and so on, and you just have those templated, so you don't, once you've got them, you don't care about them anymore. And the other side of that is building those playlists in ways that take as much as possible away from the user that's doing it, in terms of like how is my playlist structured and how are my assets structured underneath that, and if I bring in inserts and things like that, how do I build the reels for those inserts? We want to take that away as much as possible, automate all of that, and we do exactly that, and then give you something that makes sense downstream as well. So in the way in which the assets, for instance, are tagged together, there are different methods. So if you have an original version of a movie, then maybe you have foreign version of the titles, a few picture inserts through the movie. Different studios like to work in different ways. They may tag the tag the inserts to the reel that they're in, and they build a new MXF file, which is, again, if you've already got the MXF file, you don't need to re-QC all the original stuff, you just QC the new stuff. But then you might tag that onto the original MXF file for each reel, which gives you a lot of advantages in terms of sending that out into different territories and having everything you need for that. Or you may want to just consolidate that and build it into a single reel, which means that you have like a native version and like an original version and an international version. The international version has got the extra reel, which has all those bits in. And different studios want to manage that stuff in different ways. What you don't want the user to have to do is think about any of that. You just go, okay, their template is to do it this way. So I'm just going to switch that switch into tag mode where that stuff gets chucked on the end of each reel, and the system deals with that. You don't want the user to have to think, oh, that studio needs it that way and that studio needs it the other way. So there is some complexity in there, and I think my experience so far is that we're really still learning a lot. The workflows are not finished. I mean, we know IMF isn't finished, right? There's a long way to go with it, but I think if you can start thinking in that mindset of this abstracted playlist which just references your assets, it really does have advantages. It's just kind of a cultural, change in the workflow and how you think about building it in the first place. But it's worth the effort now, because in the future, if we can get good adoption for IMF, it's going to make everybody's life so much easier. And it is going to take huge amounts of pain out of the system, particularly in swapping stuff around between facilities. Often the pain is downstream, so it's the person receiving it having to deal with that content when they know it's not right, and if that means that you as the person who sent it have to re-deliver, that's really costly, especially for small facilities.
That's right.
The time, they can't waste time doing it all again, they don't want to. So there are two things: there's less of that happens when you get into this IMF type workflow and interchanging it as a format, which is good. And then if there is a problem, it's much easier to fix, and that has to make economic sense for both parties.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for telling us about it's an interesting perspective on like I'm doing a lot of stuff on IMF and the very superficial way it can really enhance a facility, smaller facilities, for example. But it does show you how the IMF is really designed to grow into the sort of descriptions and the ubiquity and the universal cloud and other aspects that going down this path will bring. So that's why you sort of need to get interested in IMF now. Get used to it, get your feet wet, just start using it at the simplest level. So when you do see the advantages, like you have to walk before you can run, and we need to start to walk. So please have a look at IMF, and thank you very much, Richard.
No problem. It's great to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you too. This is James Garden, CineTechGeek at NAB 2016. Bye for now.